Hello everyone, this is an introductory AutoCAD tutorial. When you open AutoCAD for the first time, it looks something like this. I'm using AutoCAD 2022 for Mac. If you're using PC, it's similar enough. The interface might look a little different, but the workflow and setup is the same. So I'm going to open the AutoCAD template file, and to do that, I click Open Files or Project. If you want to create a new file, you select a template. AutoCAD .dwg is a good one to use, but we already have a template file, so I'm going to open the file. And I'm also going to open this other one, but open just the AutoCAD template file. And it'll look something like this to start. I've predefined layers in this file. Just to give a background of the setup of AutoCAD first though, on the left hand side there's a bunch of different toolbars that we can use. You can expand things by clicking the little drop downs or clicking the little arrows. We'll primarily be drafting in 2 dimensions. AutoCAD it can do 3D as well, but it's typically not used that way. Up on the top are tabs for different files that you have open. You can click the plus sign and open files that way. It's nice to be able to tab quickly through different drawings if you're working on a project that has multiple different files. On the bottom down here are tabs to go from what's called model space to paper space. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we get ready to plot. On the right hand side are the layers and properties windows, the X reference manager, and a block manager. We'll talk about all of that. When you open AutoCAD for the first time, maybe your layers and properties panels aren't showing. If you type LA, just in the keyboard type LA, it brings up layers. And to expand it, you window over, click and drag. You can also expand by clicking the caret to show the layers if they're not showing. You can drag up and down to bring different panels above. Layers in AutoCAD work a little bit differently than in Photoshop and Illustrator. Just because a layer is on top of another one on the list does not mean that it is necessarily on top of the layer below it. The layers are useful for organizing information. Typically in plans and sections and elevations, you organize information on layers so that you can control line weights, and then also so that you can turn different things on and off. So sometimes, for example, you might not want to see the furniture layout when you're working in a plan, so you can freeze layers or turn them off. Freezing is turning them off. So in this case, the little snowflake will freeze a layer, and then to unfreeze it, you just click on the snowflake. Again, you can lock layers. This is a setting for printing layers. There are certain layers like def points and then a non-plot layer that won't print, so you can have information on there that won't show up when you print. But then the rest of these are just some typical layers that are set up to help organize the drawing and to control the different thickness of line weight as well as type of line type. At an office, there's different standards and ways of working. This is just one that I've made for you for this tutorial. The layer that you are on is the one that's highlighted blue. You can double click to select a different layer, but I'll show you a quick way of changing layers in a minute here. Under layers and properties is what's the properties window. So whenever you have something selected in a file, different information about the object that you have selected, whether it's a line or a piece of furniture or something like that, else like that, it will show you information about it here. So this changes as you're working. References, we'll talk about those more in a minute, but this is where you can link other AutoCAD files, you can link PDFs, you can link JPEGs, other image file types to the actual drawing file itself. And then blocks are useful for creating duplicate instances of the same thing. So for example, I've drawn trees in this file. If I wanted to have a tree and copy it many times, blocks are typically used for furniture, although sometimes blocks can be used for other things like plants, vegetation, Sometimes like window assemblies or facade assemblies can also be created as blocks. So AutoCAD is similar to Rhino in that it's a drafting software. It's command-based, so when I type in a command like L-I-N-E, or quite simply you can type in L and then hit enter or the space bar, and then it asks down here for you to specify the first point. I click and then I move my mouse in a direction. Notice that I have the snaps, sort of polar snaps turned on. It suggests kind of a direction, the perpendicular direction. See how it turns green? That's letting me know that I'm snapping perpendicularly. And then I click again. I can keep clicking to complete the line. When I finish drawing lines, I hit spacebar or enter to finish the command. Down here, a couple things. If I want to be sure that I'm working in ortho mode, that's an important one. Clicking this snap is helpful. And then having O snap turned on, it just will, O snap is this one with the little square and the dot. That just means that you're going to snap to the points on lines. This is important because in AutoCAD sometimes it can seem like you're snapping to a line, but you might actually be next to it. Mess up a drawing if you're not careful. So I would almost always have the O snap and the perpendicular selected. Everything else down here I typically don't have turned on. Another thing just for quick setup, if you type units, double check that your units are set to architectural whenever you're starting a file. There are other types of units that you can set, but architectural is an important one for drawing buildings and spaces, both plan, section, and elevation, and then precision can be set to 16th. The rest of this can stay, hit OK. Another thing to set up are your actual snaps. So if you type O snap, this is where you can select what exactly you want to snap to. So I like having the end point, meaning like the end point of a line, the midpoint of a line, the center, so that's like the center of a circle. Nodes are important things to snap to. Intersections can be good. You can turn all of these on if you'd like, but maybe starting sort of with this selection would be my recommendation. You can always go back and add or take away as you're working. And hit OK. So from there, I'm going to first import an image file that I've found of a tiny house to draw. To do that, I'm going to type xref and hit space, and then it opens my reference manager panel. I could also just come over here and click that, but so then up at the top is a little plus sign. I'm going to attach a reference. I'm going to navigate to where I have saved my images and plans and documentation of my house, and I'm going to import the floor plan. Hit open, and then this is saying where do you want to insert the image. I'm just going to decide where I want it to go, and I'm going to determine the scale. So I'm going to hit OK, then I'm going to click once, and then I'm going to move my mouse till the image scales a little bit to an arbitrary size for now on the page. The next thing I want to do is scale the image itself. And so down here, luckily this drawing actually has a scale bar. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. It's okay if yours doesn't. If it does, you can use it as a tool for scaling an image. If it doesn't, a helpful thing to refer to are just items in the drawing itself. So a lot of times doors are somewhere between 2'4" and 3 feet wide. Counters are often 2 feet deep. So picking kind of a dimension that's known and typical or standard can be a way of scaling a drawing if it doesn't happen to have a scale bar on it. So you'll do it the same way or a similar way that I'm going to scale this drawing. Just use the reference of the width of a door or the depth of the counter or something else that you know or can guess closely about to scale. But since I have a scale bar, I'm going to use that. So first I'm going to draw one line kind of at the end of the image itself, and then I'm going to copy it by typing CO space over to kind of the edge of that scale bar. And so that is the scale of this image itself. Then I'm going to copy the same line, the first line, that distance in AutoCAD. So when we draft in AutoCAD or when you're drafting in Rhino, it's important to draft at full scale. When we print or plot, you can then set the scale of the drawing to be whatever you want it to be and to fit on a piece of paper. But when we're drawing everything at full scale. So 1 inch equals 1 inch in AutoCAD, and in real life, 1 foot in real life equals 1 foot in AutoCAD. So I'm going to copy this. We're in meters. I'm working in feet and inches, so I looked up earlier. 5 meters is about 16.4 feet. So I put the feet sign and then hit enter. And so that copied that line 16.4 feet. So now to scale this image, I just need to scale with a reference point. So I want to make this distance that distance. So I select the image by clicking on it. If I window up, I select the image. I type scale. Notice that as I start to type a command, the window kind of suggests things for me. So I'm going to type scale, hit enter, and then I'm going to click once, and then I'm going to hit R, enter, and then I'm going to tell it the first length by clicking again, and then I'm going to click one more time, and then another time. So I'll do that one more time. So select the image, type scale, click once, hit R, tell it how far, click again, click. It's a couple clicks, so you're clicking to get the dimension to scale. So now I'm just going to test this. So if I type DI, it just is distance. So if I click and click again, that's about 16.4 feet. So that tells me that the drawing is, at least according to this scale, correct. Another thing to check is just like roughly, okay, if I know a sink is normally around 2 feet or so, sometimes a little shallower, that's close enough to 2 feet. So I'm comfortable with this drawing being to scale enough. So scale your image of your building first, and then you can use that to trace and then draft with. So another thing that's helpful, if I select the image, it's pretty bright right now. So I'm going to, up here, the image control comes up. I'm going to just sort of, you can right click and hit adjust image and that'll bring that up as well. But I'm going to just fade this out by like maybe 50% just so I can see a little bit better. So it's not so bright on the screen. The next thing I want to do is I think I want to lock this image or get it on a layer so it doesn't move around when I'm tracing. So I'm going to go to layers and properties, and I want to, if I have this image selected, here is where I can change the layer. So under properties, I'm going to put this on the XREF layer. XREF is short for X reference. It's just a layer that you can put things like images or other files on. And then I'm going to go and expand my window. Here, I'm just going to lock the XREF layer. So now, when I try and move that, I can't. It's locked and secure. So then, to draft, it's pretty simple. Normally, you know, I pick a spot and I start. It's always a good thing if you're drawing something that is known dimensions to kind of work from the big dimensions inward to smaller dimensions. But since I'm just tracing this image, it doesn't really matter how I go. So again, you're drawing the lines by typing L, clicking, and then clicking again. I can click past the lines. I like doing that and then coming back and trimming rather than having to be exactly kind of lining up. But so I'll copy CO space, and let's see. Typically when you're drafting, you have an idea of like wall thickness if you've measured a building, but I'm going to use whole numbers. So that's about 8 inches. So I'm going to type 8, enter, and then let's see. Yes, copy, drag my mouse down, 8, and then enter, and then I've copied a line. You can, you know, again, I have snaps on, so I'm keeping everything orthogonal. So I'll just keep going. So to trim something, you type TR. trim, enter, and it asks to select the objects to trim. So I want to select the one I want to trim with, and then hit enter, and then I can trim again by selecting that one and then hitting enter. So you select what you want to cut with, and then you select the line that you want to cut itself. To do something that's an angle, I can do that by, I'm going to turn off the ortho mode. So I click it to turn it off, and then I'm going to turn on polar tracking. You don't need to. It'll just tell you when you're like at certain degrees. But then I'm going to bring this line, and I'm just going to kind of eyeball and click, and then sort of line it up that way. It's pretty good. And then I can trim that back out. I'm going to turn ortho back on. Move is a good tool. It's M space, so I can move a line. So I can copy a line, CO, click, move in a direction. I can move a line by selecting it, hitting M, and then clicking. I can move it a certain dimension. So if I click and then I want to type in 1 foot, I can move something specifically a dimension. I can move it around. I can type M space and then click a point and then move it and snap to another point. So I'm going to show that again. So if I want to move this line specifically to here, I click and then tell it where to go. So it's so that's move. Trim is where you TR space, select the object that you want to cut with, hit space, and then select the item you want to cut. Fillet is one that can make corners. So if I had sort of this condition and I wanted to turn a corner, if you type F space, you select both lines, and notice how I selected on this side of the line and that side of the line, and it made a right corner there. If I did it on this side of the line and that side of the line, it makes the corner there. So fillet is a good one for making corners. Copy, move, fillet, trim, those are kind of the big ones. But so once once you've drawn a fair amount of the plan with just lines, you can then assign things to different layers. So let me just quickly draw a couple things here and show you what I mean by that. So let's say, one way to do it is to just keep changing layers as you're drafting. I find that I like to draft things first and then go back and change layers later. It just saves me time, is what I've found. But so let's say you've drawn the whole plan, but I'm not going to draw all of it right now, so that would be a long tutorial. But let's say you've made it through drawing the plan and now you want to move things onto certain layers. A very easy way of doing that is using what's called match properties. So let's just say we've got the start of a plan here. Got a window, and let's do a piece of furniture too. Okay, so there's that. Okay, and I'm going to actually open the layer panel, and I'm just going to freeze the XREF layer for now so I can see the mess that I've made. I'm going to trim out some of these walls just so you can see a little bit better what's happening. Okay, so let's say, there we go. Let's say you've made some progress and you've drawn the rest of the house, but for just for now, let's look at this part. So I want to put the window on its own layer, and I want to put the glass of the window on a layer, and I want to put the window sills on a layer. So if you use these layers here, one quick way of moving things to different layers is to type match properties, and the command for that is MA space match prop. So I select sort of the line, let's do glass. So I select the line I want to paint with, so I select glass, and then I come over and I fill in the glass. And then I can do the same thing with like the sill. I can paint the sill that color. And then I can do the same thing with the wall layer. And so this is just a quick way of then, assigning layers in your drawing so that when you go to print, they print sort of with the right thickness. You can do the same thing with furniture. Again, these layers are set up to print pretty well. Like, I'll show you how to adjust line weights, and you can make new layers yourselves. So under here is where all the layers are. If you want to make a new layer, you can kind of click this stack of paper. If you hover over it, it tells you what it is, and hit new layer. Down here, it asks you for a name. I'll just do a test. And here's where you can adjust like the line type. So if you want a dotted line, a dashed line, continuous line, you can load other line types. There's lots of them in here. Used for different things. And then, that you can set that line type. You can set the thickness, so you can do something really thick or really thin. And then what's nice about that is then, like, when you go to print, everything that's on that layer itself will have those properties. So it's kind of a nice tool to globally control things. Sometimes when you're printing, you might decide, oh, actually, it's not showing as thick, and you can change that globally. A lot of offices will have standards set up so that you're not having to define that every time. It's a known thing, and you just use the correct layers as you're drawing. Some of them, are pretty obvious, like things like poche and the walls, and all of these items kind of belong on their own layers, self-explanatory for the most part. You typically have text on its own layer so that you can turn it on and off. And then there's some layers that are useful for drawing elevations that are sort of those heavy, medium, light, and cut line weights that we're familiar with from drafting by hand. So that, again, to turn on and off the layers, you hit unfreeze and freeze. So I would go through, draw these components, trace them, and then once you've drawn that, do the same thing with importing sort of the section and or elevation drawing if you have them. With this project, I actually had sort of only an elevation drawing, no section, but I was able to sort of create the section itself from the elevation drawing. What's kind of a helpful thing, let me go back and show an example of this. So I'm going to unlock the XREF layer. I'm just going to rotate things just to line up my plan with my section. And just move this over. So rotate is a good one, actually. If you rotate something, you select it, type RO, space, and then it wants you to click a point and then rotate it around. So you click and then move your mouse in the direction you want it to rotate. Because I have ortho mode on, it's going to rotate at perpendicular, but if you wanted to do a certain angle, you can turn that off. So that's rotate. It's a good one. Mirror is another one that I didn't show you. So mirror is kind of nice. Like if you have something and it's symmetrical, like maybe the tables that I drew for the bed, for example. If you wanted them to, if you have two of them and they're exactly the same, you can mirror them by select, type MI, space, and then you select the line that you want to mirror over. And then it's asking you if you want to erase the original object. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. So hit no, and so then I have a mirrored version of that. So that's mirror. But so to keep going, I found this house had both a floor plan and an elevation, which was nice. If you just have a floor plan, you can, again, guesstimate or estimate heights from photographs. But if you do have an elevation or section, that can be helpful for just knowing what the actual heights are. So I'm going to hit open. And then again, I'm going to just scale everything myself, and I'm going to tell it where I want it to be on the screen. So I hit OK. I click once, and then I just kind of make it big enough so that I can work with it. You could scale it the same way we did before, scaling it to the actual like feet based on that scale bar. But in this case, since I already have the plan, and I know that my plan and my elevation and my section should all line up in space, I'm just going to line up my building and scale it that way. So I'm just going to draw, this is how wide the building actually is. This is how, just the random scale that I brought the drawing in at, that's how wide that is. So I'm just going to draw a line here so you have something to click on. I'm going to select and type scale. I'm going to click, I'm going to hit R, I'm going to click again, I'm going to click the distance that it is, and then I'm going to click the distance I want it to be. So that gives you kind of, again, the scale that is lined up with my plan. And then from there I can draft, trace this with an elevation. I used the cut, heavy, medium, light line weights when I was drafting the elevation. I'll show that here. Turn this off. So that was helpful, to just use kind of a couple line weights in the elevation. I don't need like furniture and whatnot. So I just used those basic 4 line weights. And then with the section itself, I used those line weights as well. I'll show kind of how I did that. So once you've traced the section or the elevation, depending on what you're trying for your project, the other drawing should be easy to make from that because you have half the line weights. So you can just copy it and use it again. So work smart, not hard. But so I know that like in this case, my let's just draw a couple important lines, and I'll turn the image off so you can see what I'm doing. A lot of times you work back and forth between like freezing sort of the XRF layer. You want to make sure this is on the XRF layer. Working back and forth between freezing the XRF layer. You can unload XRFs too if you prefer to work that way. So if you go to the reference manager and right click, you can unload something and it makes it go away. I like freezing the layer, it's just my preference, it's up to you. So if you freeze that, it goes away. But so this was my sort of house. I'm just trimming. To trim quickly, if you type trim and then hit space and then space again, it will trim anything that's intersecting. So it trims things, but like notice how it trims everything that's intersecting. So these lines here trimmed, but erase is E, it's another good one. E for erase, so select something, hit E, space, and it goes away. Control Z is undo. There's a couple other useful commands on the assignment sheet, so check that out. But so in creating the section, I can look at pictures, but I also can use that elevation drawing that I've imported, because I know that in section, the building has to be within the boundary of the elevation drawing that I've found, right? So it can't be any bigger than that. But so I know a couple things. Let's see that like there's going to be some structure in there. About a foot is probably fine for now to assume. When you're designing projects in real life, you'll know those actual dimensions, but we're just kind of guessing because we don't have an actual section. I know how thick my walls are because my walls are drawn in the plan, so I know that, I have a wall here that's going to be, I believe they're 8 inches thick in this house, but 8 inches thick. And then I know that my roof structure is probably somewhere near that thickness as well. It could be a little thinner. But so I'm just going to offset, so I select the line, type offset, or type O, enter, and then tell it how far, 8 inches. I don't have to type inches, I can just type 8 and it knows that it's inches. So enter, and then this wall is also 8 inches thick. I can pull that from the plan if I have the plan drawn, and I offset it 8 inches. And so now I'm pretty quickly, there's a wall here, I've pretty quickly blocked out, if I fill it, F space, kind of all of these layers, I pretty quickly have a shape, right? So then if I show, maybe I'll turn that elevation back on, so you can kind of see that, fade this out, you can see that the sort of section is kind of following that elevation drawing. And then from there, looking at photographs to see other things about the project. So there's a kitchen. I like downloading the pictures onto my computer, but so just looking at the interior, I noticed there were these beams here. I saw there was kind of what the door looked like. I kind of got an idea from the inside and outside of what was happening loosely. So if you have a few pictures and some rules of thumb, you should be able to kind of get to this level of a little bit more information, right? So I'm pulling, from the plan that I drew, I can pull this edge that I see beyond in the drawing. I could pull this edge and that edge, and then there are steps in this project. It's like kind of like a little seating area. And so if I pull all those lines up, that shows me vertically where something's happening in the drawing, and then the heights are the things that I used, just photographs or just common understanding or dimensions like we did in the previous drafting exercise. So the height of this counter I have at 3 feet because that's a typical counter height. So using kind of photographs and rules of thumb, you can get to a section drawing if you have just an elevation, or vice versa, pictures and the combination of the other drawings. So go through and draw kind of all of the line work, set your layer, get match properties to get your layers on the right, your line work on the right layers. Another thing that can be helpful to do is to cut a little section line, draw that. I have it on a non-plot layer. You don't have to have it on a non-plot. You can print if you want it, but it helps me to remember like where I'm cut through. Once you have the walls drawn, one thing that is, I haven't gone over yet, is what's called hatching, which is how you get poche. So if you've drawn all your walls, let's say, you know, you've got, maybe I'll just do it on the, just delete the hatch. So if you've drawn all your walls and you want to poche them, pink is the layer that is the walls. One way to do this is to isolate layers. So and hatch, it's kind of easier that way. So if I type lay ISO, enter, select the layers I want to be isolated. So I'm going to select the wall layer and then that poche layer, hit enter. If you can do that and then, sorry, lay ISO, select that layer, select that layer, hit enter, and then you have sort of something to use, and I type hatch. Here's where you can select kind of different types of hatches. Solid is fine, so I just click where I want to fill. You have to have a closed boundary or it'll get cranky, so you can't hatch something that's not closed. And then if I just want to put that on this gray layer, I just type match properties, MA, select that layer, and then paint the new one. And then I type lay uniso to go back to normal. You don't have to isolate layers to hatch, so you can hatch within a drawing. So I can type hatch, enter, and then click a point. Sometimes when you have lots of stuff in the drawing, it can get cranky if it is reading too many things at one time. So sometimes isolating the layer saves time. So that's hatch. Let's see, making a block is a good one. So blocks are duplicate instances of the same thing. So a lot of times furniture is put on blocks, like this bed is on a block, just so that when you move the furniture around, you can just click one thing. Like I can move this bed all together with this sofa is not a block yet, so let's make it a block. So to make it a block, you select everything that you want to be in the block, type block, hit enter, give it a name, just call it sofa, and then it wants you to select a base point, so I click this, and then I pick that edge and hit create block. And so what that does is it just gives you something to snap to nicely, and also helps like later when you edit the block, that's sort of the key 0, 0 point within that thing. So what's nice is, so if I had multiple sofas and then, so I'm going to copy a few of them to show you, and then let's say the sofa changed or the owner picked out an actual sofa, you can edit the block by double clicking on it, and maybe the new sofa was a little bit smaller than, and it had like one, maybe it's like a love seat instead of a sofa. And so it changed, I hit save and close, now all of those blocks changed. So it's really useful if you have something in a drawing where there's multiple things and you want to be able to move them around, but then also blocks are helpful if things change in a project over the course of time. Let's see, you can download them. You type in free AutoCAD blocks, different websites come up, you can download them. I drew these trees just with circles. Circle is a good command, circle, CI. So you click once and then click again to decide how big it is. If you click once, you can also tell it a specific dimension. So if you had a tree that was a certain radius, you could type that in and it would make the exact circle dimension. Let's see. You can explore with different hatches. So I just did a hatch for this bridge to get to the building. I did a hatch for the vertical siding. You could draw those lines. I just did a vertical hatch and then a horizontal hatch for the railing of the bridge. So again, just using sort of these line weights appropriately. Foreground, middle ground, background, and then with the plan itself, it's like pretty self-explanatory. Like plumbing, you put on plumbing layer, doors on the door layer, etc. So I think that's pretty much the gist of it. One other thing to go over is plotting or printing. So when you are drafting, you're in model space is what it's called, and that is where you're drawing something that's at 1:1. Again, 1 foot in real life equals 1 foot in AutoCAD. When you want to print something, you can set the scale of the drawing and you can define the paper space. So let's do that. So if you click, you probably have layout 1. It may or may not look something like this. To make a new layout, you right click or you hit the plus sign and hit create new, and then the new layout pops up and you can right click and hit edit page setup. And this is where you can change the plotter. So I would set it to DWG to PDF.PC3. It's a weird thing, but basically it just takes a AutoCAD drawing file, which is a DWG, and converts it to a PDF. And then I think 11 by 17 might work well for most of these tiny houses. And 11 by 17 in a vertical format seem to fit well for my house. You can make multiple pages if you need to. If your house is a little bigger, you can do horizontal if it fits better that way for you. Just see how things go. This is what happens when you're practicing in the real world in architecture and interiors as well. You have to decide. And then plot styles. If you go to monochrome, this should work well for this. And then you can edit plot styles here, just so you know. It's a way to do it. The only ones that we really care about editing are these grayscale ones done at the end. And I would just select them and click use object color, and then that should be good to go. The rest of this can stay as it is. Display plot styles is kind of nice. That shows you what it's going to look like in paper space. It should be good from there. So hit OK. And that actually, if I edit page setup, that didn't do vertical. So if you want it to be vertical, select the other one, hit OK. And now you have a vertical format. Now notice that this viewpoint is just the old 8.5 by 11 size. But what this does is this takes the model drawing space and takes a little snapshot of it, almost like working with design. It's sort of linking in a way to the actual models that the drawing that's done at 1 inch, 1 inch equals 1 inch, 1 foot equals 1 foot. So to set the scale, if you have the viewport itself selected, it's showing up blue as selected, and you go to the properties panel, you can go down and set the scale under standard scale. Let's try 1/8 inch equals a foot, and then it scales things and zooms in, and notice that it's no longer centered. So if I double click and with my scroll wheel, I'm just panning. So if I click and hold, it doesn't change the scale, it just allows me to pan around and get things centered. If I zoom in and out, it changes the scale. So you don't want to zoom, but you want to pan. It's actually kind of tricky sometimes. So you just got to be careful when you're setting this up that you're not zooming. You can always check by selecting the window itself and going back to properties and looking and seeing what standard scale is set. The viewport itself, if you don't want the box to print, you can put that on a non-plot layer by going to properties and saying non-plot. To make a new viewport, so maybe I just want to show just the elevation, and I can copy the viewport, CO, and move it down, and I can double click inside of it and then pan. Notice that the line work went to color. Don't worry, it'll plot okay. It just for some reason does that. And then so I can copy viewports. If you want to make a new viewport, so let's say you accidentally delete them all, if you type in viewports and hit enter, and then active model configuration is fine, hit OK, you can draw a new window, and then it does the same thing. So then you still need to set the scale by going to Property Manager, Properties, scroll down, and then set the scale to 1/8 inch. You'll notice that it zooms, and so you just move it over and center it. Take some time to like get the drawings laid out nicely, line them up. Again, mine fit well on 1:11 by 17 in vertical format at 1/8 inch equals a foot. If your house is bigger than this tiny house, you might need more pages. One print is perfectly fine. If you need to do more than one, that's fine too. The other thing that you want to do with this is go back to model space. So if I click model, I go back to model space. If I go back to the layouts, I can click on those tabs at the bottom. If you can rename them. If you want to name them something else, that's fine. You double click on the words to rename them. And then under model space, you can't rename that. But I'm going to go back over here, and you can copy this text or you can use this text, but just type the name of your house, the designer, and then the location and year. If you don't have text in the file, you can type mtext, and then it asks you for a window, and you can type anything. Notice that it scales really far, small, so I can match properties to get it to be the same size as other text, or I can scale it. So I type scale, so I can scale things. But different offices have standards for that, but for this, just so you practice with text, go ahead and type those, and then get those kind of laid out nicely. The next thing, once you have everything laid out really nicely, is you just type plot, and it brings up that window that looks similar to our page setup, because it's the same thing. So just make sure, when you're looking at it, that it's DWG to PDF, layout, 1:1, monochrome, print with plot styles. And so then I hit preview, and it pulls up a preview of the PDF where I can see the line weights. They look pretty good. If you're not happy with something, you can always go back and test it. But then you X out of that, and then you hit plot, and then it asks you where you want to save it. So I would save it, use the naming convention, and then you'll hit enter, it'll plot. You can open the PDF file directly from there, and then one thing that's always a good tip about AutoCAD is sometimes the way that things look on a screen is different than when they print, so you always want to be testing how they print. These line weights should be good, but just so you know. So that is AutoCAD in a nutshell. Make sure that you save your AutoCAD file and save your PDF and upload them both to Canvas. Thank you.